Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming along. My name is Matthew Morris. This is Salesforce Architecture, the big picture, which could be a presentation that talks probably about anything. So when I submitted the title, I didn't really have, a concrete answer about what it was I was going to present. So I hope you enjoy. I did toy with it being Salesforce Architect, the big picture. But anyway, I'll get some feedback from you at the end to see how you think the title went. Who am I? Well, I'm Matthew Morris. You can tweet me at MATMorris. A little bit about me. I've been in technology IT for 25 years. I have worked in Salesforce for about the last 10 years. Prior to that, I worked on everything that came before that, so green screen, the web, Visual Basic, and then ultimately the cloud. I think we were doing some things better before Salesforce, but they're working on it, so we can talk about that maybe as well. What leads me to this is probably for the last 5 years I've been working in the architecture role, and if I look back at my journey, 5 years ago I thought I could do that architect thing. I've been around the block, I know technology. I was in the wrong job, I didn't have the right skills, I didn't have the right experience. So really everything you're about to see is kind of a summary, I suppose, of my experience for the last 5 years. Now, you might have got the impression I'm a little bit opinionated, so with thanks to my good friend Don Robbins, I've borrowed his forward-looking statement, which says this presentation may contain extremely opinionated statements. So these are my opinions that I'm sharing with you. I'm very happy to have discussions afterwards about what your opinions are as well. But I will just say, Don has a great presentation that he gave at a conference last year, so you can get it at bit.ly/Don Success. I really recommend watching that, where he talks about learning and formulas for success in personal development. So I borrowed his slide. I said I'd give him a plug. So architecture and architects everywhere. And this is something that's, if you've got LinkedIn accounts, you're probably approached by recruiters looking for Salesforce Architect, or you see job adverts for Salesforce Architect. And that might be a solution architect, it might be a technical architect. And then you might be practicing technical architecture, or solution architecture, or enterprise architecture. There's architecture everywhere. Salesforce now loves the word architect and architecture. What does it mean? This is the question that I have. This is the question I throw back to recruiters when they say, I'm looking for a solutions architect. So I went looking for a definition. I went to the dictionary. I was a bit lazy. It was the first website that I went to. I said, what definition do we have for, what is architecture? The one that I liked was the second one there that I highlighted, which is the complex or carefully designed structure of something. Nicely ambiguous, but what I took from that, it sort of chimed with, my experience over the last 5 years, which, if you remember at the beginning, that's really what this is all based on. So what we're talking about is really complexity. Got to understand that complexity. And then we want to apply some structure to it, right? Again, I'm being slightly vague, so stick with me, we'll get there. But this, for me, is the process of architecture. Let's look at a couple of examples. So here is a highly structured example of some architecture, or if you prefer, marketecture, which is marketing plus architecture, right? So this is something you might see in a keynote. You might have seen this in the Dreamforce keynote a couple of years ago, where it didn't have this bit in the middle. This is what I call the Einstein sandwich, and as they announced Einstein, they cranked this thing open and slid in the meat in the sandwich, right? But you understand what it means, right? And this is really important, where they're communicating with you. Hey, we've got some very complicated technology, right? We just saw some of that in the keynote, right? Blockchain, incredibly complicated, but let me show you a nice non-scary picture, and you as stakeholders can buy into that. And that's what they've done here. So they've structured it nicely in order to communicate some details about it. Of course, you can dig in and dig in and dig in and get something that's a little bit more complex. Let's look at something a bit more complex. I found this one in a Computer Weekly article, the diagram that scares the next generation of banking IT professionals. I think they deserve to be scared. What does it look like? It's actually quite an interesting article. Banking is a horrible, horrible legacy of systems, and this is what a core banking landscape, architecture landscape looks like. There is a lot of stuff. So highly complex. But again, If you're interested in different stuff, so we as Salesforce type people might be interested in customers and customer service, there's bits in their architecture which are more relevant to us than other parts. And the same for other people and other groups, right? So complexity, apply structure so that we can understand it and move forward. So this is my definition. The process of understanding complex requirements, and anybody who's worked on projects will know that complex requirements on the face of it often look fairly straightforward. And then as you start to dig into them, you find that hidden complexity. If you find that early, maybe you can do something about it. If you find it late, what happens? There's problems. So the process of understanding complex requirements and then applying structure in order to define, deliver, and maintain, right? Because even after we've walked away, we don't want this thing to fall over, a technology solution. Because after all, we're in the business of technology. Yes, we're in the business of success, but we're also really ultimately in the business of technology. We are technologists. So this is my definition. Opinion again, caveat. How can we break that down a little bit more? Well, if we look at what are the factors for success ultimately, so we want to apply some structure to the complexity. Well, first of all, we need clear objectives, or ideally a clear objective, so we know what it is that we're striving for. We need business commitment, so that's stakeholders that are on board, engaged, prepared to stand behind the things that they say. We're going to need some skilled people, and that's going to be a very wide variety of skills these days, but we're going to need the people to do the job. And we're going to ultimately need to communicate effectively. So all of that needs to be validated and coordinated in order to pull all this stuff together. Whose job is that? That's our job. That's the job of the Salesforce Architect. And it's really a role rather than a job title. So you might be sitting there today thinking, well, actually, I am the person who takes responsibility for validating requirements. I am the person who says, hang on a minute, that is or isn't going to work. If you're not recognized as an architect today, perhaps that's something that you could work towards, even if you think perhaps I'm not the world's most technical person. Actually, it comes down to, are you prepared to take responsibility and stand up and say, yeah, here's what needs to happen, folks. So that's Ruth. Have you met Ruth? Yeah, good. Dominique is here, so I think she's doing a presentation later. She can go along and talk a little bit more about Ruth. So it's a mix of skills. So let's talk a little bit about the skills. What are the skills that are involved in drawing this all together? So what are the skills that an architect needs? And I'll say that this is not an exhaustive list. You can challenge me about, oh, what about this, what about the other? Yep, I completely accept that there's more. But again, based on my experience over the last 5 years, these are the things that really it comes down to. We need to understand, what's the data that's being involved. At its heart, classic Salesforce is a CRM. It's all about data in a database, and then we apply processes to that. Security, awfully important. The solution architecture. So when we say solution architecture, what that means to me is we're talking about the features inside the Salesforce platform that we're going to make use of. Communication and influencing, and I included influencing there because it's great to stand up and be counted. It's great to make things clear for people. But if you can't persuade them, if you do, as I have done on many occasions, wave your hands in the air and go, what the hell are you doing? You're not really influencing them. So that is a soft skill which, I'm concentrating on practicing and improving, because ultimately that's how you're going to affect the outcome with a lot of people. System architecture, so it's not just a Salesforce world. And I'm so happy now that after the MuleSoft acquisition, integration is not a dirty word anymore. You can talk about integration with your AE because they can sell some licenses out of it. But system architecture and integration go hand in hand. You might notice actually I drew the integration jigsaw piece as the bit that's connected to everything. And that's really, I think, core to many, or I'd say the majority of Salesforce projects of any size. Anything beyond sort of 10 licenses, you're going to be integrating to at least one other system. Probably multiple, right? So system architecture and integration. And then the development life cycle. So how are we going to build this thing? How are we going to test this thing? How are we going to deploy this thing? How are we going to maintain this thing? And that's an iterative process. And if you don't have that working smoothly, it can hold up absolutely everything else. So over the last couple of years, there's been improvements by Salesforce with Salesforce DX. There's been additional vendors come in with products for source control and deployment management. Goes to show how important this area is in terms of being able to make change quickly. And then finally, the most overlooked but probably most important is governance. And when I got into architecture 5 years ago or so, I didn't really know what governance was. Sort of a scary word. Actually, it's the most important thing. Let's talk a little bit more about communication and influence. This is my favorite. It goes back a little bit to the Einstein sandwich, where people come back from a conference or back from an EBC and they're just on a complete sugar high because they've been shown all of the things that could be done, all of the outcomes that could be achieved, but they haven't really appreciated the hard work and the sacrifices and the commitments that they need to make in order for that to come about. So one of the most demanding jobs, I would say, for people who are in the architect role is really bringing people down off of that sugar high and helping them understand, okay, well, that's the dream, absolutely. We've also got 20 years worth of technical debt and underinvestment in our systems. Here's the steps then that we need to take in order to move forward. So in terms of the modes that could operate in, within sort of a pre-sale environment as an architect, you could be working on an RFP, a request for a proposal, either as the vendor responding to, or the customer who's looking for, defining what it is that they're looking for a partner or a vendor to bring into the organisation. There's also opportunities out there in an advisory capacity, right? So if somebody's looking to perhaps buy Salesforce licenses, they might need advice from somebody who's independent about what kind of licenses it is that they need. Which brings me on to post-sale and what I've diplomatically termed course correction, and less diplomatically called cleanup. Can we do a hands up? Because I haven't done a hands up yet. Anybody walked into a project and, for example, they don't have any of the right licenses and they have too many of the wrong licenses? Yeah. It happens because sometimes the commercial pressures within the sales cycle move things on too quickly in order to get the right answers. So again, having somebody who's in the architect role to be able to try and bring that back into true. I was working on a project last year where we had Service Cloud licenses coming out of our ears, but we didn't have any knowledge or live agent licenses, which is what we really needed in order to get the job done. So it's examples of those things that as an architect you can really have an impact on. And then probably the bread and butter work is what I've called requirements validation. So understanding or spotting where use cases exist. So the users or the business stakeholders might be talking about things in very particular language to them, but at the end of the day you're looking at it going, well, actually that's a support process. That's a sales process, and being able to spot those high-level building blocks that you can pull on. And then digging into functional requirements, and then increasingly looking at security and privacy. And that's particularly true with the additional regulations that have come about with GDPR, and understanding up front what's the impact of the data that we're about to bring into our organisation, or that perhaps we already have in our organisation, and how we can make sure that we stay compliant with that. So I mentioned about governance being one of the most overlooked, but also most important. So this is something which there are now more materials kind of emerging about within the Salesforce world. It's not new, of course. It's existed forever within software development and project management. But I think this is something which I would encourage anybody who's perhaps got a good foundation in technical skills to invest some time in understanding a lot more of, because it allows you then to understand why projects went wrong in the past and what you can do to prevent that in the future. And really it comes down to the structure of the project, and is there good technical representation within the project or the program. So it might be that your organization has a good project or program management office, but perhaps they're not appreciating the impact that having experienced technical people as an integral part of the decision making can have on that. So one way to deal with that is through the use of a design authority. It goes by other names, and that's whereby you insert into the project structure, the project management structure, a kind of for want of a better word, a governing factor, which is that all technical choices and decisions get reviewed by the group of people who are going to be responsible for building and maintaining them, in order to validate that they can go, they can succeed. Also, processes, it's a little bit dry, and this is sort of the drier side of architecture. It's not the sexy side, but really understanding, have we defined our change management process? Do we have a defined quality process? Have we got our testing and deployment process, defined and enforced and validated? And as well, what are we going to do once features have gone live, right? Who's responsible for these systems once they're in life? Have we identified a system owner? Who's going to be responsible for the data? Who's going to be responsible for the functionality? Those of you familiar with Salesforce probably recognize more of these things. So this is sort of a bit of a listomania going on here. I've only got one of these slides, but you can sort of go down and levels of detail then from my headings, right? So with regard to data, are we using standard objects? Are we using custom objects? What's our sharing model, right? Do we have any concerns about data volumes or limits that we need to be aware of? And there's techniques which which are now much more well documented around how you can begin to discern: do we have a large data volume issue? Do we have a problem possibly with number of APIs that we're going to use? In terms of security, do we understand how to define and discuss with our stakeholders how we'll create a role hierarchy and be able to assess who sees what, and is that going to be aligned with business needs? And then from a systems point of view, it's not just a Salesforce world, as I said before. How does Salesforce fit into the landscape, and does it integrate with the other systems that are needed in order to deliver on the business requirements? And I think a good example of that would be reporting. So I think when I first started in Salesforce, sort of 10 years ago or so, using Salesforce reports, on the platform was normally enough to kind of keep people happy, and they would download it as Excel if they wanted to do any more, do anything greater than that. I think that period has really kind of gone now, in my experience. People expect a lot more, and this is what Salesforce have sort of tried to address with the Einstein Analytics product, and now the acquisition of Tableau, to be able to do cross-system reporting. So yes, we have our CRM data, we have our case management data in Salesforce, but what about our inventory? What about our CTI and IVR wait times, right? So how long were people waiting before they even got through for the case? That data is not necessarily going to be in Salesforce. Are we going to bring it in, or are we going to have an overarching reporting solution that's going to draw it together? So that's one example, and I could talk more about each of those bullets if we had more time. But you see, Salesforce is part of an overall puzzle, of an overall solution, and so just having your head within Salesforce CRM platform isn't really enough if you're in the architect role. And then there's everything else. So it's not just Force.com, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, where we started off now. Things continue to grow apace. So, a few years ago, there was the acquisition of Marketing Cloud. But what we're also seeing now is the emergence of additional plugins on top of, additional packages on top of, Force.com. So things like Field Service Lightning, things like Financial Services Cloud. All of these things require specialist knowledge and specialist understanding. And I'll be honest, I don't have a hope of being an expert in all of these things. And I think the smartest thing is just to kind of recognize that and, up front manage that risk by assembling a group of people who are going to be able to, correctly identify the problems that you might be run into and, what needs to be done about that. One thing I did want to mention is App Exchange knowledge. It's a plug for the demo jam later. So having a good App Exchange knowledge, which I would say my App Exchange knowledge is not as good as I need it to be, but being aware of, what are the third-party products that are out there that can solve particular problems, which ones are good, which ones aren't so good, and what are the trade-offs, right? So yes, it's going to cost us more money, but it's going to give us these benefits, or yes, it's going to do 50% of what we need, and that will be enough if we negotiate with the stakeholders. Having that knowledge up front rather than having to go away and do a week's worth of research can also be very, very powerful. And then if, like me, you have a background in systems before Salesforce, yes, there were systems before Salesforce, that is all very useful and very relevant, because as you go into different organizations, you will certainly find those there. What can you do to tell the story? Stakeholders love pictures. So we'll come on to some resources you can pull on in just a couple of secs. But being able to communicate effectively, whether that be orally or through the use of diagrams, is a core architect skill. And if you like my PowerPoint, I've had lots of practice at PowerPoint as well. So whether it's PowerPoint or Visio or whatever you want to use, pencil and paper, being able to tell the story is really key. And that comes back to the influencing and communication. So are you a Salesforce architect? It's not really 100% a technical job. So this is a quote from another one of my mentors, and that would be my top tip: find many mentors and learn from them. My daily job as an architect involves 5% architecture, 20% common sense, and 75% nonsense. And I've certainly been in that situation quite a lot over the last couple of years. Patience and good humor, certainly other qualities needed of an architect. So, how can you continue your learning? You can get street smart, and the number of resources that are available for this sort of peer-based learning, conversational learning is increasing. So I would call out particularly the Ladies Be Architects. YouTube materials are excellent. You've got real people talking about real problems in an honest manner. That is just gold as far as I'm concerned. Don Robbins, who I introduced to you at the start of the presentation, has produced a mass of Pluralsight videos, which he calls play-by-plays, which are conversational. Again, real people talking about real problems, very, very valuable. And if you like diagramming, I have a diagramming course that is free. So that's the link there, bit.ly link for that. From a Salesforce point of view, the architect community on success, architect trailblazer community, their links on there is really everything else that you need in terms of materials. Booksmart, you can talk about certifications and all of that kind of stuff. And there's plenty of Trailhead material. And speaking of Pluralsight, that will give you a free 30-day pass. So you can watch my video for free, but if you want to go ahead and try out all of the other videos on there, on the play-by-play series, and I see some of the play-by-players are sat here in the front row if you want to talk to them as well. It's definitely worth a watch as you try to understand, as I have, what is this Salesforce architecture stuff. So that's about it. I'm happy to ask questions afterwards because I think we're probably at time. Other than that, good luck. Thank you very much.